Today we need to talk about multiplying and dividing with negatives, but as it applies to fractions. And that we've spent a couple problems of the day warming up those skills. Here's the good news, okay? We'll just say note all the same rules. And when I say rules, I'm talking about like a negative times a negative is a positive. All the same rules still apply. All right? So just because I have fractions, it does not change anything. A negative divided by a positive is still a what? What is a negative divided by a positive? It's a negative, okay? All of those rules still apply. Nothing is changing. All right? But we need to see some examples of how to deal with this as it applies to fractions. So let's just get right to it. I think you're going to be asked to simplify. And we've got, I don't know, 7 or 8 examples to go over here. Here's the first one. Now notice the way that's written. There is nothing in between the 1/8 and the negative 32, so this does mean multiplication. The very first thing we need to do is rewrite this as 1/8 times negative 32 over 1. Just like our problem of the day. Now, here's what I would do. I would totally ignore the negative sign and just do the math. Let's go ahead and take care of that sign. Is my answer going to be positive or negative? Negative. It's going to be negative. Okay? So once you get your sign taken care of, you can just ignore that negative sign. I don't even care. I mean, I suppose you could even erase it if you wanted to. All right? So now let's do our factoring. As I look at this 8 and this 32, don't they both have a common factor of 8? So 8 divided by 8 is 1. 32 divided by 8 is 4. 1 times 4 is 4. 1 times 1 is 1. My answer is negative 4 over 1, which is negative 4. Okay? Let's keep going here. How about negative 3 times negative 1/3? I talked about this one yesterday. This has a special name. It's called the inverse. Actually, the fancy name is the multiplicative inverse. And if you see this, you should try to recognize it because it saves you some work. Look what happens when I do this multiplication. First off, what's my answer going to be, positive or negative? It's going to be positive, so I'm going to go ahead and put a plus there. And now I have 3 over 1 times 1/3. So we talked about this yesterday. Look what happens with the 3's. I divide both of these by 3, and I multiply across. 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times 1 is 1. My answer is 1. If you see that situation up there where you have 3 times 1/3, it's always going to be 1. Then you just have to, take care of your sign. All right? Now, one of the things you're going to see in homework tonight is the introduction of some variables. So let's look at this same problem if it looked like this. Maybe I'll change the signs a little bit. What if I had 3r times negative 1/3? Now we've got a variable in there. That's not a big deal. Okay? This is just multiplication inside here, right here. So guess what you can do? You can just put the r on at the end. I can do the 3. First off, is my answer going to be positive or negative? It's going to be a negative answer. I can do 3 over 1 times 1/3. And didn't we just say that that's going to be 1? Right? So this is going to be negative 1 r. The variable just comes along for the ride. Okay? So you can just tack on the variable at the end after you do the math. Just negative 1r. Or couldn't I just say negative r? I could. Keep going here, trying to, like I said, we've got a number of examples to go over. What if I add this one? Now, isn't x just representing a number? Right? So watch. What we're going to do with this one is I'm going to change my order and make it 1 over x times x over 1 times 9. All I did was change the order. I could put the 9 over 1, but I don't really need to. Okay? Now watch what happens. Remember how we did factoring on all of these problems? When I did my factoring diagonally? Well, guess what? I can factor with these x's diagonally. The greatest common factor is x. What is x divided by x? 1. Isn't something divided by itself 1? Isn't 7 divided by 7 1? So x divided by x is 1. And I do the same thing here. X divided by x is 1. So in other words, don't they just factor out and go away? So I have 1 times 1 times 9, which is 9. I have 1 times 1 times 1, which is 1. My answer is just 9. So in other words, the x's just went away. Okay? They just factored out. What if I have 3 numbers multiplied together? Something like this. You're going to see some like this problem. Well, this is nothing to get worried about. We're just going to take it a little bit at a time. You know, does anybody know what 3 times 16 is? What's 3 times 16? Isn't it 48? Isn't this all multiplication? So if it were me, I would pay attention to things like that, and I would multiply these two first. First off, is my final answer going to be positive or negative out of this problem? It's going to be negative. So let's go ahead and put my negative sign over there so I know what sign my final answer will have. Look what I have. Let's multiply these two together. 1/3 times 1/16. Nothing will factor. There's nothing that can factor, so I just multiply across. I do 1 times 1, which is 1. And I do 3 times 16, which is 48. Now look what I have. Remember this 48 out in front? It has to be multiplied by 1/48. So I have 48 over 1 times 1/48. Isn't it going to be 1? Right? Now is it positive or negative 1? Remember, we said it had to be negative, so it's going to be, my final answer is going to be negative 1 because both of these 48s factor out. Okay? Now let's look at, those were multiplying problems. Let's look at division now. Okay? Let's say that I have 14 divided by negative 1/2, something like that. Well, we learned when we did division with fractions that when you divide by a fraction, can anybody finish this sentence? You multiply by the reciprocal. Good. The reciprocal means we flip the second fraction only. So this becomes 14 times negative 2 over 1. Right? And don't I have a positive times a negative? So my answer is going to be negative. Is there any factoring that I can do? There's no factoring I can do because both of my denominators are 1, so my answer is just negative 28 over 1, which is negative 28. That problem's pretty easy. Okay. Let's look at another one. What if the problem is written this way? You're going to see a few like that. This is, just so you know, this is not a hard problem. It just looks scary. Well, remember what a fraction bar means. Doesn't that fraction bar mean division? So this problem you need to rewrite as negative 8 divided by negative 1/5. Now, what did I just say on the last problem? When you divide by a fraction, I need to flip, multiply by the reciprocal. So I need to make this negative 8 over 1 times negative 5 over 1. Remember, anytime you divide by a fraction, you multiply by the reciprocal. Is there any factoring I can do? Not on this problem. A negative times a negative is a positive 40. It'll be 40 over 1, but that's just 40. All right? We're almost done. Just a couple more real quick. How about this problem? Now, isn't that just basically a fraction that needs reduced with an x in it? Look at this, just forget about the x for a second. If I just had regular old 36 over 9, isn't that just like 36 divided by 9? What is it? Isn't it 4? Right? But I have a negative divided by a positive, so this is going to be a negative 4. And then you just bring the x along for the ride. Negative 4x. That's all you have to do with a problem like that. Okay? You may have some where you have to do the division, like this one. What if you had this one? 156y over negative 12. Well, that fraction bar means division, and we don't know what 156 divided by 12 is unless we go over to the side and do it. So let's do 12 into 156. 12 goes into 15 once. Subtract. It goes into 36 3 times. So 156 divided by 12 is 13, but isn't it a positive divided by a negative? So that's going to be a negative 13, and the y comes along for the ride. One last problem and we're done. This one's a little bit easier. How about 8 times n over 8? What do you think I need to do? This is not a division problem. This is just multiplication. I need to put the 8 over 1. 8 over 1 times n over 8. Will the 8's factor? 8 divided by 8 is 1. 8 divided by 8 is 1. Multiply across. What's 1 times n? N. What's 1 times 1? 1. Any number over 1 is just itself. My answer is n. Pretty easy problem, and we're going to stop there for today.